¿Qué pasa, burritos? My name is Jeremy Burrito and I speak 7 languages. This month, I'm learning a new language, a rare language, and it's actually my mom's native language. It's spoken by 0.00005% of the population of the Philippines. My mom is from the Philippines, from an island called Panay, and the majority language of this island is called Ilonggo or Hiligaynon, and it's largely spoken in the city of Iloilo. But outside of the city, many people speak a language called Kinaray-a. There are different dialects of Kinaray-a, and the town that my family is from is called Barotac Nuevo, and so they speak Barotac non Kinaray-a. And that's the language that I'm trying to learn. It's been about a week since I started learning this. I'd already learned some languages before, so I had kind of a strategy set out on how I would start studying this. So my plan was to start learning as much as I could from independent study, and then take what I learned and practice it with a native speaker, which would be my mom or other family members. And that's the way that I learned Tagalog, and I figured, well, I could use the same technique. And my other plan was to start by learning Ilonggo, which is that bigger language from the city, and use that to specialize in Kinaray-a, which is the language spoken in the surrounding towns. And I figured this made sense to me at the time because I speak Spanish, and that helped me to learn Portuguese, or kind of like just because they're similar languages. But as it turned out, I got super overwhelmed and burned out and had to scrap everything that I had originally planned and rethink my whole way of learning this language. So how is it that for me as a polyglot who speaks 7 languages that I got so overwhelmed and ended up having such a hard time learning this language? Well, let me explain. In my last video, I'd mentioned that there were pretty limited resources for learning this language just because it's not spoken by a lot of people. So my first resource was a phrase book. It was a Mormon missioner's guide to the Hiligaynon language, and I think it's a really good resource actually. For one thing, it's very in-depth, and considering how scarce language resources are for Hiligaynon or Ilonggo, as it's also called, I was really impressed. And it even included a section about Kinaray-a. But as I took the information from this phrase book and asked my mom about it, I started to realize that what the book said didn't always line up with what the native speaker said. And naturally, you should trust what the native speaker says. And more specifically, when it came to the section about Kinaray-a, because there were so many different dialects of Kinaray-a, basically every town has their own variation of the language, the Kinaray-a that they explained didn't match with the language that she speaks. Meaning that this resource that I was using was a little limited in how much I could practically use from it. So afterwards, I went to Facebook. You can find a lot of different communities for languages or interest groups. And so scrolling through, I would read little paragraphs, stories, little memes, and I could understand some of it, like little words, phrases here and there, but every now and then there were big blocks of text, and I found it to be really overwhelming, especially after trying to sift through all of that information from the Mormon phrase book. Seeing these big blocks of text, it was a little overwhelming. And so afterwards, going to speak with a native speaker, my mom in this case, just hearing her speak at me in Ilonggo, but then kind of switching to Kinaray-a and, speaking both of these, and I could really distinguish between the two at the time. It just total information overload, and I completely shut down, and I thought, I'm way in over my head. So I had to take a step back and kind of rethink how I would do this. So what I learned from this initial experience is that Kinaray-a and Ilonggo are similar, but pretty different. You can't just learn one and a couple words from the other. And so that's what I was doing wrong. And I think you can learn 2 different languages at the same time, but if they're too similar, then they're also easily confused. If you're learning 2 different languages that are vastly different, I think it actually ends up being easier because you won't mix them up, right? And the other thing I learned is about dialects. As I'm finding out, there are a lot of different dialects of Kinaray-a, and so yeah, just kind of asking my mom questions about her language. She tells me oh, in this town they speak this way, or oh, in this part of the island they use some odd words, or they pronounce this differently. And so kind of being aware of the fact that like this is the dialect that I'm trying to speak is also important in being able to speak correctly, or learning the correct kind of language that I want to be able to use. So now, my new updated technique for learning this language, what I did is I went online and I looked for like the 100 most commonly used words and went through asking my mom, how do you say this? How do you say this? How do you say this? And taking notes along the way. And it's a bit of a tedious process, but you know, there are pros and cons to it. And so, how much Kinaray-a do I actually know now? Well, I'm getting better at understanding what I hear, and I can make some basic sentences, and I can distinguish between Kinaray-a and Ilonggo now a little better than I could before. So how different are Ilonggo and Kinaray-a? Well, an example sentence, let's say, he will not go out tomorrow because it might rain. In Ilonggo, it's hindi siya malakat buwas kay basi maulan. In Kinaray-a, it's hindi tana mapanaw haruman hay basi mauran. So it's similar in some ways and very different in other ways. And so now I'm focusing exclusively on learning Kinaray-a. Also on the note of rain, I'm learning some interesting words that are used in Kinaray-a. So, side note, they say that the Vikings had 10 different words for fire and that the Inuit have 10 different words for snow. And it's related to the culture, no? So naturally in the Philippines, there are like 10 different words for coconut, tropical islands. And also in tropical islands, there's a lot of rain. So there are a lot of really interesting words related to rain that I've learned. And so rain in Kinaray-a is uran. But as I learned, that's like full-on rain, downpour. But if it's a light kind of rain, like light showers or a drizzle, it's tarit-hi. Tarit-hi. Which is kind of a hard word for me to say, but I think it sounds really cool. And so if you want to take cover from the rain or other weather, like hide from the sun, hide from the wind, the verb is magpasidong. And my favorite word is suray. So suray means to be out in the rain without any cover, such as like an umbrella or a hat or a hood. All of that is just suray. So let's say your friend is about to go outside, but you're worried he might get sick because he didn't bring his umbrella. Then you tell your friend, hey, don't suray. How specific and perfect of a word is that? Suray. So this is my first update on learning Kinaray-a. And now that I have a better understanding of how to go about learning the language, I'm going to continue sharing the process of learning this language. And so if you would like to follow me in this process of learning a new language, subscribe to my channel down below, and I'll see you in the next video.